People who switched sides in a highly divided community. Political, religious, pizza topping debate. What happened that changed your mind? How did it go? I used to be dead set against marijuana legalization. Why do we need another legal intoxicant when the one we already have causes so much harm? This will allow easier access for underage users. Will lead to an overall increase in drug use. Blah, blah. Full stop. I then came to a pretty sudden realization that in jurisdictions where marijuana has been legalized there has been a significant harm reduction and drop in other illegal drug uses. For example, opioid users report switching to legal pot. Underage use has not spiked, and the numbers of people who say they are drug users has not increased. In the end, actual data ruined my previous certainty about what I thought I knew. Now I just need a flip-flop t-shirt. I used to be an active member of my church. I'd experienced a near-death experience when I was a child and was reaching out to try to better understand what happens to a person when they die. One thing my youth pastor was adamant about was that D&D was a gateway for the devil. He used to talk about his younger days when he was a teen and he tried D&D and how the devil would reach through him and act through him and his friends. He says he stopped when the devil tricked him into thinking his friend was a demon, and he tried to kill his friend. My brother was getting into D&D at this time, so this was particularly worrisome. It led to a great deal of fighting between me and my brother. Over time I kept watching for signs of the devil in my brother and never really found any. I started taking a closer look at the books and trying to suss out what the threat was, but couldn't find one. Then I started pressing my youth pastor and people who knew him for more information. Eventually my youth pastor slipped up and mentioned that he'd frequently drop acid while playing D&D. Suddenly everything made a lot more sense. GMOs. I used to feel that they were unnatural and therefore bad. After getting a chemistry degree and spending a lot of my personal time studying food science, as well as working on farms and gardening, I think that genetic solutions to farming can be great. I still think that big farming is rife with horrible practices, and some companies exploit GMOs and patents on GMOs to the detriment of humanity, but I can no longer subscribe to the GMOs equals evil point of view. I hate Daniel Craig as Bond. Brosnan had always been the perfect Bond in my mind, probably because I grew up with him. I refused to watch all movies with Craig until I saw him in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I liked that so much that I gave his Bond movies a chance. Now he's my favorite by a distance. I thought Timothy Dalton was just some guy they got to fill in for a real Bond actor for a few years. Then, I watched his 2 movies and realized he was actually a good Bond. I'd rate him behind Connery and Craig. Fishing. I used to and very avid catch and release angler. Fished with some of the best. Was in a few magazines etc etc. I started to look a bit closer as to what I was doing. How many fish survive after catching and releasing them and came to the conclusion that though it's fun for me, at the time, it probably wasn't all that much fun for the fish. My regular group of fishing friends who were a fun and very talented, knowledgeable bunch, mostly conservation-minded guys just couldn't understand my change of heart. I now fished only to keep, which they though was wrong, but I never over-harvested and always kept to the limits allowed or just a couple for supper, freezer, whatever. I'm not sure what changed my mind, but I just started feeling bad about how I was hurting another living being for nothing more than essentially bragging rights and my own pleasure. Fishing to keep and catching less does seem to make more sense. Cilantro. I absolutely could not stand the soap-like flavor for 20 plus years. Entire stalks slapped on my Thai entrees, bits in the guacamole, haunted my dreams and dang near ruined Thanksgiving one year. Then one day, like magic, the soapy fog lifted. I have no idea what happened. I absolutely love the stuff now. Try soap now, maybe you'll love it. I've pretty much stopped using straws. I know it sounds stupid and small, but the plastic pollution stuff is getting to me and I am not a green type of person at all. So it's a big deal to me if for nothing else than personal growth. As time goes on, and pretty much every time I take out the trash, I'm reminded at how utterly wasteful everything is. Baby steps, I guess. So one day you said that's the last straw. I used to study chemistry, a real science, and laugh at geologists. Fake science. Hated and failed chemistry, and now I am studying geology. It's absolutely fascinating. Definitely a real science, and I really care about the subject matter. I was trapped at home after school. Mom and dad were both dead, and I was looking after my siblings. It was a small community, and I was bored out of my skull, angry at the world for my crippling responsibility, and honestly not being a very good brother, truth be told. Then the world's most handsome dude moved in next door. Not gonna lie, the initial interest was purely physical, but after some flirting and a bit of back and forth, he started mentioning his politics. Apparently he was kicked out of his last place because of his extremists' racial views. Being young, dumb, and in love, I absolutely ate it up. We actually started planning actions that would hopefully lead to a coup. And well, purge is a strong word. Anyway, I stopped thinking so blatantly racist and started actively fighting that crap after he and I got in a fight with my brother. We accidentally killed my sister. Now I'm the headmaster of a prominent boarding school and try as hard as I can to stamp that sort of thing out when they are still young. Just to confuse people further, you should mark this comment, serious. Grew up in the rural conservative Midwest. Raised in a family where God was everything. Dated a girl who, along with her family, also continued those sentiments. Religion never really clicked for me, but I went along with it because that's the community, and why wouldn't I? Everybody I cared about was religious. Might as well. That changed when my then girlfriend's older brother, members of the church, and her parents organized an intervention for my then Jill-friend. They told her they were worried about my soul because I listened to non-religious music and liked D&D and fantasy movies and blah blah blah. I was only 17 at the time, and it felt like my biggest sin was liking punk music and R-rated movies, and being that I was in such a small community, I felt pretty hurt and personally attacked. So I brought it up to the pastor at the only church in town, and he sided with the intervention, hand-waving away my concerns. That pretty much ended my relationship with the church, the girl, and the community. Got out of there, moved to a bigger town, met new people, new friends. Haven't looked back. I was raised to believe homosexuality was unnatural. I grew up around homophobic people, so I naturally hated gay people myself. The first time I encountered a gay person in public, I laughed and made horrible jokes about how he talked. Guess who turned out gay? Toilet paper over or under. I used to be in the DGAF camp until I realized under was Satan's work. Over all the way now. I was raised in Norway on the notion that marijuana is just as bad as H. Smoking weed was not just a gateway drug. It was the absolute devil, and if you even had one puff, you'd soon find yourself in a ditch somewhere. I had my beliefs reinforced when I moved to Canada and saw weed smoking classmates flunk classes and drop out and generally fail at holding their attention on anything. However, during a public speaking class, one of my classmates toppled my worldview. He was a great guy, funny, yet unsuspecting. I had never seen him argue for anything with passion before. But when he spoke to the class about the history of marijuana in the US and Canada, and how it had been demonized due to industrial interests, and then he reinforced it with personal accounts and statistics, I remember the end of his speech so clearly. It was as if I was suddenly seeing myself from the outside. Could I have been wrong about this all along? It didn't set me on a path to smoking weed, but it did make me reevaluate a lot of things in my life. It made me always try to keep an open mind during discussions and arguments, hard as it can be, because maybe, just maybe, I might be the one in the wrong. And I must say, the feeling of having your worldview turned upside down is certainly not easy, but it's a refreshing feeling worth pursuing. If you really give an opposing side a chance, you'll find they often make valid points. It's been over a decade since I changed my mind about marijuana. I've tried it a few times since, and I let my family know it's not as terrible as they thought it to be. I do still believe it can damage you long term if you use it too frequently, but I am fully convinced it should not be the super illegal substance it's made out to be. I used to be against nuclear power, so I then decided to research it for school, and it turned out it might be the best we've got until renewable resources get further in their development. I don't think it's the best long term, but I don't think it's the devil no more. My parents, who were green wavers during the 70s, are very mad at me for this. Used to be extremely anti-vaccination, now quite in favor. What changed my mind? I had a baby and had to make that decision for someone other than myself. I dove into the research and did a lot of soul searching. It was really just a problem with ignorance on my part. We are all fully vaccinated now. Good on you. My mom, a nurse, chose not to vaccinate her youngest of 5 during the peak of the anti-vaccination craze, despite her 4 other children being vaccinated without issues. It took her about 6 years to finally concede to all of the research and get him vaccinated in time for junior high school. Goes to show how potent social fear can be. I used to think programming was dumb and computers were ridiculous for not being more intuitive. Then I spent 11 years working with people and realized they're worse. Now I'm stressed and can't remember how to program anymore. After years and years of doubt, I went to the museum that had a detailed exhibit on evolution and decided that was the last straw and officially left the religion 3 days ago. As a result, I am now being shunned by almost every single person I have known for the last 32 years. Why? I used to hate country, but then I discovered the banjo and bluegrass, and turns out what I hate is modern country. Sturgill Simpson is an exception. I left the Mormon Church. I knew there were plenty of problems, but I ignored them until I had my daughter. Decided that I could choose to face the problems head on, but didn't want to make that choice for my daughter, especially since the church is full of sexism and patriarchy. It went far better than expected. My wife left with me after several months of open conversation. I am happier, healthier, and more optimistic about the future than when I was burdened down with that orthodox religion. I used to be a Sunni Muslim, then became a Shia Muslim. Now I believe in no institutionalized religion and I would consider myself an agnostic. Used to love the original Star Wars trilogy, then I went to our prequels. A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one. I grudgingly accepted Chicago pizza as pizza after having Giordano's. Back east all we get is Uno's. In terms of deep dish FFS, not in terms of pizza as a whole, which is garbage. Uno's is the kind of crap you would expect to find in a pizza MRE. I used to be a neo-Nazi sympathizer, realized I was trans and am a radical leftist now. Self-hate is a powerful thing. After spending time in Chicago, I have come to accept that Chicago deep dish is, in fact, very good. I still do not accept that it is pizza, but it's very good. Wisconsin had an election in 2006 where a ballot item called Referendum 1 would decide whether marriage between a man and a woman would constitutionally be the only legal form of marriage accepted and allowed in Wisconsin. It passed with 59% of the voters voting yes, and the state constitution was amended. I voted yes. Shortly afterward, I started thinking a lot. I started to realize that many of my friends were gay and I was friends with their partners. They were happy. They adopted kids. They volunteered for the fire department. They were nurses. I started realizing that their homosexuality didn't define their being. I was foolish and ashamed. By 2011, I deeply regretted how I voted. Who was I to judge how people were supposed to live their lives and who they could marry? Within a 5-year period of time, I completely changed my mind. A new movement to get the amendment ruled unconstitutional was formed and I found myself supporting the group. In mid-2015, the US Supreme Court declared the referendum was illegal. When I was young, I thought paying taxes was like theft. One day I looked around and realized how expensive society is. From road to a fire hydrant to the plumbing to get water to the hydrant to the machines and labor it takes to dig holes for the pipes and the engineers who plan it and the people who order the stuff and so on and so on. Then I was like, I guess a few thousand a year for everything around me is getting off easy. I'm a conservative and used to be really homophobic until I realized I live in a country founded on personal freedoms and we shouldn't decide whoever the frick someone wants to marry. Still a conservative but couldn't give two shoots if you are gay or not. Same. There's a funny quote I read a while ago that said I used to be against gay marriage until I heard they weren't mandatory. I know people who are baffled that my own preferences don't mandate my political views. I used to think that it was awful that people ever died, or wanted to die, or wanted to abort a pregnancy. I thought that it was normal and natural to want to fight for every last moment, every last breath, even if it wasn't quite great. Then I got into medicine and nursing. Now I understand how valuable death is in life. How important it is that we have that choice and that option. There truly are some times where the life you are living is truly awful suffering, and it's cruel to expect people to continue on with it. It's cruel to ask a mother to give birth to a baby that will die, or to risk her life for one that isn't even more than a few cells. It's cruel to ask somebody who will never move again to continue living that way just so we don't feel bad. Death is important sometimes. It saves us from when life goes very bad. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.